Expert Strategies with Joe Welu. Hey, Joe.
Kelly, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing fine. You know, we got to just put the millennials on the table. This has to be one of the most talked about groups of people, even more than the baby boomers. What's up with that?
Well, it certainly is. If you look at millennials as it relates to the mortgage and real estate industry, it's the largest segment in American history. Everybody thought a few years ago that millennials were just going to be renters. Their lifestyle, the way they looked at housing was different. And much to a lot of people's surprise, as it turns out, they want to do the same things that the generations before them have done, which is when they start getting married and life changes, they want to buy a home, right? And so it's become a big topic because of the sheer massive opportunity that's there. And the way they interact with brands, the way they interact with businesses and professionals is extremely different.
It is, every year there's a college in Wisconsin that talks about their graduating or the kids entering college that year, what was and wasn't available when they were born. And now, cell phones. We've got kids that don't know a world without cell phones.
Right. They grew up with a screen in their hand.
Exactly.
Yeah. We see the way they consume information. I'll give you some examples on some of the differences. They tend to wait much longer in the buying cycle, in the customer journey, if you will, before engaging with a business or a human being, I should say. So, for example, if they're looking at a home, they're starting to research online. Many of them already know their credit score because they've got the Credit Karma app on their phone.
That's
right?
true, yeah.
Or their bank provides it to them on the app, right? So they know that. There's a million different online payment calculators, so they know what their payments are going to be, so they don't need to talk about that. It used to be we'd have to get a buyer in so they could figure out what their payment might be. Well, now they kind of ballpark. They got their credit score, they got the payment, and they got the house information. They've got more information in many cases than the agents and the loan officers do, because they're better at research.
Yeah.
So they're waiting and narrowing it down until they've found the 2 or 3 homes that they really are passionate about and they'd like to see. And we call it the point of sale, because literally they're walking into these homes, that last couple they've identified, unrepresented, no lender they're committed to, and they're transacting essentially where they walk in, have that emotional connection with one of those last 2 or 3 homes, and then that becomes the point of sale. So it's hugely different than when back in the day when we used to have to drive buyers around and look at 35, 40 homes.
Oh, yeah.
Baby boomers probably still do that in some cases.
Yeah, for sure.
So hugely different.
Well, how does one go about and try to capture this elusive group of people and maybe perhaps build that relationship prior to? Right. Is there a way to do that?
Absolutely, there is, and they're not as elusive as what you think. The key to millennials is the journey. And the journey starts with they expect to have, number one, they love knowledge. So education-centric marketing. Once you interact with them, say on social media, or you get an email address or what have you, the key is to add a ton of value to them without expecting any immediate return.
Okay.
And most companies and producers fail at this. They try to put a hard sell on that customer when they're maybe just doing some research. And if you took a position of adding value, providing really strong content to them and started building a relationship, you are going to have a much higher opportunity to close that transaction versus if they're not ready to buy now and transact, you don't spend any more time with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I want to put you on the spot a little bit.
Sure.
Give me an example of, in your opinion, what you think a value add would be at that early stage. Give me a sample.
Yeah, no question. I think one of the easy things is data. They love data on neighborhoods, on their housing market. If you're on the producer level and you're targeting neighborhoods or communities, If you're putting out content around that's valuable about the communities and neighborhoods, that's very valuable to them. They look at that as a value add, and it starts building some trust there. You build credibility as an expert. You want to be the authority on mortgage or real estate. You have to start building credibility, and by educating and providing knowledge, that's one of the fundamental things you can do.
Okay, let me ask you if this passes the test then. So the U.S. Federal Reserve does this profile. It comes out every 3 years, and it's an economic and demographic profile. And one of the stunning facts that came out of the last one is that homeowners in the United States have 31 to 46% more net worth than renters, and they can support it through this incredibly intense survey. Is knowing that the type of thing that you think a millennial would appreciate hearing about?
No question.
Okay.
No question. I think anything that educates them about the reasons that homeownership is important,
Okay.
they already instinctively want to own a home. People want to nest. It's just, that's in our DNA. But I think reinforcing economically why it makes sense, and it rarely makes sense to rent for your entire life, right? I think that's a huge opportunity to add and provide value.
Do you think that this group perhaps, and whether it was something that they actually thought themselves or if it was something that was projected on them by the mortgage and real estate industries and maybe even the pundits in general, do you think that the idea of watching their parents maybe go through the housing market crash and all the situations, did that really affect them, or did we just assume it did?
No, I believe that it's real. I lived it along with a lot of people at our company that were in that industry, during that time. It was profound, and a lot of people went through a lot of pain. Now, here we are 10 years later, and a lot of that pain has subsided, and the more time that passes, I think that pain starts to fade some, and people have, in many markets, recouped all their equity if they ended up staying in the home and realized that in some areas they've actually even appreciated beyond where the peak was in '06.
Yep.
So, but certainly people that lost their homes and went through foreclosure, and those kids were part of that, it certainly did affect them.
Okay.
But what they've seen is just a tremendous recovery, right? So they've seen the fact that most likely that was the level that happened on. It was a once in 100-year type of scenario.
Sure.
So they're definitely looking at home ownership again because the rents are, they're increasing and have increased every year since the crash. So renting is actually monthly in many cases, costing them more.
Absolutely. We went to the MBA Technology Expo out in Palm Springs, and the chief economist for the MBA said that this blew my mind, rents are rising at twice the rate of inflation in the United States right now. And if that's not a compelling piece of data, I don't know what is. But how would you say that mortgage companies and realtors out there right now, in wanting to approach and really help this huge demographic, how would you tell them to use that piece of information in a positive way that draws them in?
It's a great point, Kelly, and I would tell them that utilize it in the dialogues that they're having when they have the opportunity. A lot of our customers and organizations on both the mortgage and real estate side that we work with, they're out interacting with the customers at what we call the point of sale, at the homes themselves, open houses or subdivisions. And those conversations, being able to have those dialogues with those millennial buyers is one strong way to do that. Putting it in original marketing pieces and being able to have it put out to them in an authentic way that they're able to interact with it. And we don't recommend ever starting to spam them with gobs of what we call marketing that's not authentic, I guess, for lack of a better word. They love to digest meaningful information. So providing it at every opportunity that you have in a non-salesy way. That's the key.
Okay, what you said at the beginning of the conversation, it just struck me here. Open houses sort of became something that people either didn't think they worked anymore, whatever. But what you're saying now is, have they sort of had a resurgence? Because you're basically calling an open house almost a point of sale system now.
It is, and they have had a resurgence. Obviously, we'll probably do a segment purely on open houses. We could have a whole segment on that, but they absolutely have had a resurgence, and they have because of that sales cycle. That customer journey is different.
Okay.
So if you think about some of the major technology and advancements we've had in the last, say, even 3 to 5 years, we've got Uber, to where you can push a button and have a car.
It's so crazy.
It's awesome, right?
I love it.
I love it. I'm one of Uber's best customers. I'm pretty certain of that. But that's what they're used to. They're used to having that immediate gratification. Now, they don't want Uber calling them on the phone saying, "Hey, would you like an Uber this weekend?"
Yeah.
Right? So you think about how we used to prospect and engage those people. We'd be calling them and texting them or whatever and saying, "Hey, do you want to get together this weekend and talk about it?" It's like, you know what? I'm gonna notify you when I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a major difference.
So yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I know that I'm hearing out there a lot more about open houses than we did, so we'll have to make that a separate segment. Final thoughts on millennials, because there isn't really a day that goes by, in a given business week where somebody isn't tackling a question about this really hugely important segment of our society.
Yeah, you have to be purposeful about your millennial strategy. You can't market to them the way you've always marketed to everybody for the last 10 years. So that's number one focus. Be purposeful about how you're doing things with millennials. And if you're using the same marketing assets and things that you've always used, you're probably going to fail, at least at some level, with getting the lion's share of the millennials. You have to realize it's a journey, and the transaction for many companies has always been a destination. We get to the closing, and that's the destination. Millennials want to build long-term relationships with brands they trust. Look at Apple, right?
Oh, yeah.
Brands like that. So those would be my few pieces of advice regarding millennials. Be purposeful, engage with them in a way that looks at the life cycle of them as a buyer, not just the transaction, which would be considered the destination.
And you've once again sort of turned things on their ear just a little bit, because for the longest time, and I think people are coming out of this assumption now, but for the longest time, millennials were sort of written off as being flighty. And you're saying we have to be far more purposeful in trying to gain them as customers and look at it as a long game.
Yeah, and intentional, purposeful, whichever word you prefer, it's really the same concept, but play the long game. You have to play the long game. You have to invest for the future. If you expect to do marketing in one campaign 1 month and you don't get any result and then you stop, you're going to waste your money. You have to play the long game with them. I think that's a great point, Kelly, and what is needed to really be successful at Millennials.
Expert strategies, and I'm sure there will be much, much more on millennials coming up in the future, because it's just a never-ending topic, because it's the biggest demo in the U.S. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly.